all-time low, and it's not looking good going into Christmas.
Laura Tingle, thank you.
Thanks, Leigh.
On those national accounts figures, the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, is with me now from Parliament House. Thanks for coming in, Treasurer.
Nice to be with you, Leigh.
You've got a big problem here, which is that you need businesses and individuals to spend money to keep the economy chugging along, and the figures show they're just not. Why not?
Well, what these numbers show is that actually their household disposable income, that is money in the pocket of Australians, have had its biggest jump, 2.5%, in a decade. And these numbers show the remarkable resilience, Leigh, of the Australian economy, despite the economic headwinds we face with a absolutely devastating drought at home, but also the trade tensions abroad. And at a time when other major economies like the United Kingdom, like Germany, like Singapore and South Korea have all experienced negative economic growth this year, the Australian economy continues to grow. At 1.7% is an increase on the previous quarter, and at 0.4% was in line with market expectations.
You pointed out at the start of your answer that disposable income's up, but that goes back to my point, which is people aren't spending it because they're worried, they're uncertain, they're using it to put into their savings.
Well, they're doing what the government is doing, and that's paying down their debt. And in fact, 70% of people with mortgages are more than a month ahead of their prepayments.
But that doesn't stimulate the economy.
But it's not my job to tell Australians how to spend their money. My job is to give them more money to spend or to save, and that's their choice. Your
job's also to manage the levers of fiscal policy, and we're at a point in the economic cycle where you need people to be spending money to stimulate the economy.
Well, what we have seen is remarkably strong growth in our labour market, more than 1.4 million new jobs being created, participation rates at around record highs, more women, more young people, more seniors in the workforce, and that is good news, and that's where our focus has been, and that's where we've had a lot of success, as well as getting the budget back into balance for the first time in 11 years, and we'll deliver the first surplus in 12 years, and that means paying down the debt we inherited from the Labor Party.
The government gave Australians a tax refund in the hope that they would spend it. As I've mentioned, they didn't spend it. Isn't that a persuasive case that they aren't working those tax cuts to stimulate the economy, and that the budget is foregoing that tax revenue for no real return?
Well, as the Secretary of my department, the Secretary of Treasury, told Senate estimates, if people are paying down their debt, ultimately what that means is that in time they'll reduce their interest payments, which means they'll have more to spend in their discretionary income. So it becomes a timing issue, but more money in the pockets of Australians means ultimately more consumption in due course.
But most people have, if they're paying down debt, it's usually a pretty long-run thing. So you're talking about maybe people might have more money to spend in 10, 20, 30 years.
Well, I'm not talking about that long at all. I'm just saying right now there's obviously some significant headwinds facing the economy. People are looking at the global environment, and there's no doubt there's some uncertainty there. They're looking at the devastating and damaging drought, which in these numbers show that farm GDP is down 5.9% through the year. And of course, the government has been there to spend additional money to support those communities. But all that is playing into to the consumers' choices.
Well, let me come to the tax refunds question from the other way. People didn't spend this lot. Is that a persuasive case for you to bring forward your next round of tax cuts from 2022 in the hopes that people might feel they can spend that?
Well, obviously, we're always the party of lower taxes, and we're always looking at opportunities to reduce taxes. But what we have focused on is legislating through the Parliament. We've done that successfully, again, against Labor opposition.
But how about bringing forward your next round?
But what we've done is we've legislated those tax cuts. They're working through the economy. They're staged over a few years, and these, refundable tax offsets, which have made their way into the economy, billions of dollars into pockets of Australians, will be spent, is being spent, but also is helping to pay down their debts.
Businesses aren't investing either. We've been talking about individuals, but businesses aren't investing either, even though interest rates are at record lows. Earlier this week, the former Treasury Secretary, Martin Parkinson, said that was partly due to policy uncertainty during the past decade over energy and climate policy. Is the economy paying the price because the Morrison government lacks a coherent policy in that space?
Well, firstly, non-mining business investment is up by more than 30% since the Coalition came to government. So we actually have a very good story to tell there. When it comes to energy policy, our focus has been on driving down prices, and we've had success with that, but also about stabilising the grid. And that means having a reliability guarantee, which we've agreed with the states. That means underwriting new projects, particularly gas projects, which are an important transition fuel as you move to more intermittent sources of power, namely wind and solar. Of course, Snowy 2.0 is a groundbreaking nation-building project which will power more than 500,000 homes and be a big battery for the east coast of Australia. So we have a climate policy, we have an energy policy, and it's setting prices down.
Even the former Liberal Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, said last week that the Coalition doesn't have a coherent climate and energy policy, and then that's forcing businesses to hold back billions of dollars worth of investment because of uncertainty.
Well, I would put to you that our policy is about stabilising the grid as there's an inevitable transition to lower emission sources of power. We've seen record amounts of renewable investment in Australia. In fact, compared to other countries around the world, we're near the top of the list.
Can I ask on that point about an inevitable transition, just a first principles question. Is the Coalition's economic policy underpinned by this view or not, that over time Australia needs to transition to a carbon neutral economy?
We're absolutely supportive of reducing emissions over time. And
but to a carbon neutral economy?
Well, yeah, absolutely believe in seeing a reduction in the carbon footprint right across the economy. Now, the energy sector is about 1/3 of the overall emissions, and we've seen a dramatic decrease in emissions over time. And when you've actually seen a number of coal-fired power stations close, and in its place you've seen more renewables come in. But the problem is, unless you've got backup and storage, and this is going to be Victoria's real problem this summer, unless you've got that backup and storage, when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, you don't have the power to support industry and to support households. So that's really where our focus is at.
If I can ask you about a couple of other issues before we're out of time as one of the government's senior figures. Senator Lambie voted with the Coalition to repeal the Medivac bill, as we heard before. What did you have to offer to secure her vote?
Well, what we had to offer is a good policy, and that is to get rid of a bad piece of legislation.
But she was undecided, so what's been offered as a sweetener?
Well, the Prime Minister was asked that very question today at a press conference, and he was very emphatic that what we have committed to is our existing policies.
There's been a substantial distraction from the government's agenda in recent weeks, thanks to Angus Taylor. His explanation of how he came to circulate a document with false data in it has been challenged by metadata provided by the Sydney City Council. Do you, as a senior figure in the government, accept that there are some unanswered questions here?
Well, firstly, Angus Taylor's doing an excellent job as our Energy Minister, and he's categorically
That's not what we're talking about, Treasurer.
But he's categorically rejected those allegations that the Labor Party has made, and he's made a statement to Parliament to that effect.
You're comfortable with that? You don't think there's any unanswered questions here?
Well, he's put his case, and as you know, there are now police inquiries, so I don't want to speculate on that because of that current inquiry. But what I will say to you is that the Labor Party is making a habit of referring ministers to the police with nil outcomes, and at some point they have to be accountable for that 0 and 8 track record of theirs.
Regardless of how the situation came about, and let's say, you know, the minister is entirely blameless, it is indisputable that the minister's office did circulate a document with doctored numbers for political gain. Given that Angus Taylor still has his job, isn't the only conclusion the public can make is that this is the standard of integrity that the Morrison government considers to be acceptable?
Well, absolutely, we uphold the standards in the Prime Minister's standards. We uphold those, and Angus Taylor has given a statement to the Parliament that's very clear and emphatic. And as you know, these issues are now subject to a police inquiry. So let that play out. But I wouldn't, if I was you, I wouldn't rush to judgment.
Treasurer, thanks for your time this evening.
Good to be with you.